Welcome to Alter Health, the Epigenetic Code. This is where we talk about the science of how your life shapes your genes and how your body can change when you change the conditions around it. Real stories, real science, and real answers. Let's go. There are sentences that change a life. Most of them are not loud. Most of them aren't even said. They are just true in a way you were not prepared for. My husband said one of those sentences to me, sitting at our kitchen table in Bavaria, in the months after we got the diagnosis. He said it calmly, without crying. He said it with a kind of clarity that the people we love can have when they've already done the thinking while we were still flailing. And what he said broke something in me. And then, a few hours later, it built something else. Today I want to take you inside that conversation. I want to tell you why his sentence was the worst thing he could have said. And I want to tell you why, in the end, it became the reason I am sitting here doing this work today, talking to you, helping people walk back from diagnosis that the system has given up on. This is Alter Health, the medicine nobody told you about, and I'm Dr. Nicola Schmitz. To understand the conversation, you have to understand the state I was in when it happened, because I have made it sound in the last 2 episodes like I was a woman of action the whole time. The detective who wouldn't stop, the wife who pushed the doctor to order the test. I was that woman. But I was also, in the weeks after the diagnosis, a woman who was quietly falling apart. There is a particular kind of falling apart that happens when you have permission to fall apart, but you don't want to. Our daughters didn't know yet. We had decided not to tell them until we had something more useful to say. Our parents didn't know. Nobody knew. So I went to work every day, and I treated patients, and I taught my employees. I came home and I made dinner. I helped with homework and I smiled. And inside, I was running a constant private monologue that went something like this. He's going to need a wheelchair, he's going to need a ventilator, a feeding tube, and the doctor said they cover all the equipment. The doctor used the word equipment. The man I have loved since I was 17 is going to be reduced to equipment. We will go to bed at night with machines in the room. He won't be able to hold my hand and not be able to hug our daughters. He won't be able to drive. He won't be able to ski or to do the things that are him. That monologue ran in the background of every meeting, every meal, every conversation. It didn't stop. It just got quieter or louder depending on how distracted I was. I started losing weight without trying. I was not eating much. Food felt mechanical. I wasn't sleeping well. I was waking up at 3 in the morning and not getting back to sleep. The same time I had started waking up when I was searching for the diagnosis, except now there was nothing to search for. There was just dread. My husband, on the other hand, was eerily calm. He had taken the news, processed it in his way, and adjusted to it faster than I could. That is just how his nervous system works. He's a head person. He looks at the situation, he assesses it, he files it, and he keeps moving. It is one of the things I love about him. It is also, in that period, one of the things that drove me a little bit crazy, because his calm felt like he had already accepted the future I refused to accept. And one evening, when the dishes were cleared and our daughters were in their rooms, we sat at the kitchen table together. We were drinking tea and we started talking about it, really talking about it. The first long conversation we had since the diagnosis where neither of us was being polite or careful. He said, look, we have to talk about this practically, not emotionally, which is, to be honest, very difficult, almost impossible for me. But, okay, practically. Because the emotional talking we're going to keep doing for years, but we need to talk about what happens. I said, okay. He said, the doctors are clear. This is going to progress. We don't know how fast, but it will. And at some point, I'm going to lose function. I'm going to need help with things I don't currently need help with. And I want you to know how I want this to go. I said, okay, tell me. And then he said the thing I had been afraid he was going to say. He said it without drama. He said it the way you tell somebody what you want done with your car after you die, calmly and practically. He said, I don't want to be a burden to you. I don't want you to spend the rest of your life being my caretaker. This is not about you, it is about me. And I love you, but in this case, I have to set me as a priority, and I don't want this. So if it gets to the point where I cannot do things for myself anymore, where I need machines to keep me going, where I am dependent on you for everything, I want you to know that at that point, I want to pull the plug. I don't want you to feel like you have to keep me alive. If my body goes, I'd rather go with it. We've had a good life. Our daughters are grown. We have done things we wanted to do. And I'm okay with how it ends. I want you to imagine sitting across from the person you have loved for over 30 years and hearing those words. The words pulling the plug from their own mouth about their own body with a calmness that suggests they have already thought about this, already decided about this, and made peace with this while you have not even started. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just looked at him. He thought he was being practical, and maybe he thought he was relieving me of a future burden, and he thought he was being kind. From his perspective, he was. He's not a man who wants to be a problem for the people he loves. He's not a man who wants to be sentimental. He was telling me, in the language he could speak, that he loved me too much to make me carry him through years of decline, and that he couldn't stand that. And what I felt wasn't gratitude. I felt rage. Cold, quiet, organized rage. Rage at the diagnosis, at the doctors who had laid out the path of equipment, at the system that had told my husband with their bright, unbearable certainty that this is what's coming. And also rage at him, at least just for a moment, for accepting it. And underneath all of that, a clarity that I want to describe to you carefully, because it is the clarity that built everything I do now. I sat at that table and I thought, no. Not because of him, not because I'm desperate to keep him alive at any cost. I'm not. If a person is suffering and ready to go, that is theirs to decide, and I respect that. What I objected to was the script. The script that said this future is locked in. The script that said the path from this diagnosis to that ending is fixed. And that our only job as a family was to manage the descent. I thought, who told them this story? Who told the doctors that this is the only path? Who told my husband that his body is on a one-way conveyor belt and there's no exit? I had spent months researching this disease, and I knew that the medical system had told us about the trajectory, but the medical system hadn't told us anything about why the disease activates in some bodies and not others, why it shows up at one age and not another, why some people with the same gene have wildly different courses. Nobody had told us about the why. They had told us about the what. And I knew, sitting at that table, that if there was an exit from that conveyor belt, the exit was hiding in the why. So I didn't tell my husband he was wrong to think the way he was thinking. I didn't argue with him. I didn't say, do not say things like that. I said, okay, I hear you. I respect what you're telling me. And then I said, but I'm not done looking yet. You need to know that. Whatever you have decided, I'm still going to be looking, because I don't believe the story they told us. I think there's more underneath. He looked at me for a long moment, and he said, okay, look, I'm not going to stop you. That was our agreement. He held his peace with the diagnosis. I held my refusal of it. And we didn't fight about it. We just both did our thing. He went to bed that night, and I went back to the kitchen table and opened my laptop again. Now here's what's interesting about that night. The first time I had searched the internet for answers, I was searching for a diagnosis. I was looking for the name of the disease, the thing I was missing. Once I had the name, that search was over. This new search was different. I wasn't looking for what to call it anymore. I was looking for why bodies do what they do. Why one body with this gene develops this disease in their 40s or 30s, and another body with the same gene never gets sick. And they are all born with this gene, right? Why some bodies progress fast and some slowly? Why some bodies seem to stabilize and others don't? And as soon as I started reading with that question, the literature opened up in a different way. I started running into a word over and over again. A word I knew but had never paid much attention to. The word was epigenetics. Now I'm going to talk about epigenetics in much more depth in season 2 of this podcast. I'm not going to give you a full lecture today, but I want to tell you the simplest version of what I started understanding that night, because it changed everything for me. Genes are not destiny. Genes are more like a piano. The piano has all the keys, but it doesn't play itself. Something has to press the keys. And that thing that presses the keys, that decides which genes are loud and which are quiet, which genes get activated and which ones stay dormant, is what we call the epigenome. And the epigenome is not fixed. It responds to your life, to your sleep, your food, stress, environment, toxins, emotions, your nervous system. The exact same gene can be loud in one body and silent in another, depending on the conditions of that body. In other words, the gene wasn't the whole story. The gene was the script, but the body was the director. And the director was being influenced by years and years of what we had been doing to ourselves. The chronic stress, the sleep deficit, the rushed meals, the lack of recovery, the cortisol levels of two people who had been running on fumes for 2 decades. I sat there at 3 in the morning and I started seeing it. I started seeing how, for years, my husband and I had been living in the perfect environment to wake up every dormant problem in our bodies. I started seeing how the timing of when his disease activated in his 30s lined up almost exactly with the most stressful years we had ever had as a family. I started seeing how the body doesn't break down at random. The body breaks down where it's genetically vulnerable, when the environment becomes hostile enough to push the vulnerability over the edge. And if that was true, then the question changed completely. The question was no longer, how do we manage the decline? The question was, can we change the environment back? Can we shift the conditions of his body, of our life, of his nervous system, his cells, in a way that quiets the gene that is currently making noise? Nobody had told us this question existed. Nobody. Not the cardiologist, not the neurologist, not the geneticist who had laughed. None of them had said, by the way, the gene is influenced by your life. You might want to think about your life. The whole conversation about epigenetics was, for the medical system we were dealing with, essentially absent. Not because doctors are bad people, but because conventional medicine is built around treating disease once it's loud, not around quieting it before it becomes loud. Different goal, different toolkit. And I sat with that for a long time, and then I did something practical. I started looking for a way to learn this properly, because I was already a doctor, but I was a dentist and an orthodontist. I knew teeth and jaws. I didn't know enough about gene regulation, nervous system, cellular biology, nutrition, supplementation. I knew it the way most doctors knew it, which is to say, surface level. I needed to go deeper. I needed to learn it from the people who actually use it. And within a few weeks, I had signed up for a 6-month training program in epigenetic coaching. And that decision, that single click of a sign-up button, was the second turning point of my life. The first turning point was the night I decided to find the diagnosis. The second turning point was the night I decided to find what was underneath the diagnosis. The next morning, my husband came down to the kitchen. I hadn't slept. I had a coffee in my hand and a notebook full of pages of notes in my bad handwriting all over the table. He looked at me, took in the scene, and said, "You're still on it?" Said, "Yes." And then I told him what I had spent the night reading. I told him about epigenetics. I told him that the gene is not the whole story, and that there is a layer above the gene that gets influenced by everything we do, and that we, the two of us, had spent the last 2 decades doing every single thing that pushes a vulnerable gene to express. I told him that I didn't know yet if any of this could change his disease, and I didn't promise him that, but I told him that I was not going to spend the rest of our lives planning for equipment. I told him I was going to spend the next year or whatever it takes finding out if the script was actually as fixed as the doctor said it was. He listened, and he was quiet for a while, and then he said something I will never forget. He said, "Okay, if you are going to do this, then I'm with you. Whatever you find out, I will try. We both don't know if it will work, but I will not be the person who refuses to try." That was the contract. He brought his openness, I brought the research. And from that morning on, our marriage had a new project. The project wasn't to save him in some heroic, dramatic way. The project was much smaller and much more powerful than that. It was to change every single condition we could change in our home, in our day, food, sleep, in our nervous systems, and to see what would happen. I did not know yet that this project would work. I didn't know yet that 7 years later I would be sitting in a recording studio in Dubai telling you this story with my husband walking around, in fact, at the moment, mowing the lawn, building muscle, living without symptoms. Almost no symptoms. I didn't know any of that yet. All I had that morning was a notebook full of notes, a 6-month course about to start, and a husband who was willing to try. And it turned out that was enough. So that's where I want to leave you today, at this kitchen table the morning after, with a husband who's willing, with a wife who has finally found the question she actually needs to ask, with a notebook full of bad handwriting that is about to become the foundation of the next decade of our lives. Next week, I want to tell you about what I actually learned in that course, not the academic version, the version where I started to understand exactly what had gone wrong inside my husband's body, exactly why his gene had woken up when it did, and exactly what we needed to change. I'll tell you about the tools we started using, about the first signs that something was shifting, and I'll tell you about the moment, a few months in, where I realized that what I was doing for him could be done for almost anybody who had been told by the system to give up. That moment was the moment my work was actually born. If this episode landed for you, if you've ever sat across from somebody you love and heard them already accepting a future you refuse to accept, please share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. I will see you next Tuesday, because health is a choice.